In October 1942, in the farm valleys of East Tennessee, families started coming home to letters nailed to their doors. Some children carried the news home from school because the notice had reached the schoolhouse first. The letters said the War Department was taking their farms. They said to vacate promptly. And the one thing everybody wanted to know, the letters would not say. This is the story of the American towns that were erased to build the atomic bomb. 3 secret sites, chosen in secret, emptied in months. Thousands of people moved off their land. And a purpose so classified, the workers themselves were not allowed to know it. None of the 3 places appeared on any map. Letters out were opened and read. For 3 years, the state of Tennessee pretended its 5th largest city did not exist. It began with 59,000 acres along the Clinch River. 7 farming communities. Wheat. Elza. Robertsville. Scarboro. East Fork. Edgemore. Bethel. Some of those names had been on the land for more than a century. Most families were given 6 weeks to leave. Some were given 2. It was harvest season. Crops stood in the fields, and the fields stopped being theirs mid-row. The government's average price came to $46.86 an acre. Farmers who protested were told there was a war on. Payment often came slowly, and appeals went nowhere. The families had seen federal land taking before, but the TVA had at least held hearings. The Corps of Engineers' declaration of taking was, in the words of a county history, swift and final. And for some of these families, the knock on the door was not the first, or even the second. The Smoky Mountains Park had taken homes in the 20s. Norris Dam, whose story this channel has told, took the next ones in 1933. Park, dam, bomb. Some East Tennessee families packed up their lives 3 times in 10 years, every time for their own government and never once by choice. There is no plaque for them anywhere. What rose behind the farms was not a factory, it was a city. Dormitories, trailer camps, cafeterias, a cinema. From 3,000 people to 75,000 in under 3 years, the 5th largest city in Tennessee. Behind a fence with 7 guarded gates. Every resident carried a pass. Every conversation was policed by billboards. What you see here, what you do here, what you hear here. When you leave here, let it stay here. Exactly 1 resident was allowed to own the view. Ed Westcott, the government's photographer, the only man in the city permitted to carry a camera. He left 15,000 negatives. Nearly every photograph you are watching is his. Informers reported loose talk. Mail was censored. Job interviews did not mention what the job was. Husbands and wives worked different shifts in different plants and could not tell each other what they did all day. And there was mud. A city built in 30 months has no time for pavement. Oak Ridge mud became famous. It ate shoes. It swallowed cars to the axle. People joked it was the only secret the town could not keep. The security theater reached everything. Teenagers showed passes to get home from school dances. At Christmas, even the man playing Santa Claus was badged and cleared at the gate. For all the badges and billboards, the deepest irony came later. The secrecy kept the townspeople blind, and it did not keep the secret. Soviet intelligence had informants inside the project almost from the start. Inside the plants, thousands of young women sat at panels of dials, 8 hours a shift. They were told, keep the needle in the middle. They were not told what the needle measured. They were called Calutron girls. Farm daughters, most of them, some hired straight out of high school. Their machines were quietly separating uranium, atom by atom. Not one operator in the room knew the word for what she was doing. Down the valley stood a building called K-25, half a mile long. At the time, the largest building on the face of the earth, and almost nobody inside it could say what it made. Houses arrived by truck, in halves, and were bolted together on hillsides in an afternoon. The streets were named alphabetically because there was no time for history. The scale of the secret was industrial. At its peak, the Manhattan Project employed roughly 125,000 people across the country, more than General Motors. Perhaps a few hundred understood what all of it was for. And the product of all of it, the most valuable material on Earth, left Tennessee in the luggage of plainclothes couriers riding ordinary passenger trains. Grams at a time. and Tennessee was only the first. In February 1943, a federal judge in Washington state signed an order of possession for the farm towns of Hanford and White Bluffs. 1,500 people. The same machinery, the same speed, this time in the orchard country of the Columbia River. The order did not state a purpose either. The purpose was plutonium. The land was also home to the Wanapum people, who had fished that stretch of the Columbia for longer than the country taking it had existed. They were moved out with everyone else. 45,000 construction workers moved in. The Hanford construction camp swelled into one of the largest settlements in Washington state. When the desert wind rose and the dust came through, workers quit by the hundreds. They called the storms termination winds. Site 3 was different. On a New Mexico mesa stood a boarding school for boys. 46 students, saddle horses, Latin before breakfast. In December 1942, the headmaster received a letter from the Secretary of War himself. This is that letter, not a recreation, the actual page, preserved. The school held its final graduation in January 1943, awarded its last diplomas early, and handed the mesa to a physicist named Oppenheimer. For 2.5 years, the 3 sites worked on parts of a machine none of them could picture whole. Nobody was entirely sure what would happen. The night before the test, Enrico Fermi took side bets on whether the device would ignite the atmosphere itself. The scientists laughed. Not all of them. On July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert, the pieces came together on top of a steel tower. The device was simply called the Gadget. At 5:29 in the morning, the uranium from the Tennessee Valley and the plutonium from the Washington orchards did what they were taken for. The light was seen 180 miles away. The fireball at 6,000ths of a second, photographed by an automatic camera. The farms had become this. 3 weeks later, on August 6, 1945, the secret ended for everyone at once. Radio bulletins named the weapon, named the element, and named the secret cities that had made it. In Oak Ridge, thousands of workers heard the word uranium for the first time in their lives and finally understood 3 years of their own dials. When Japan surrendered 9 days later, Oak Ridge poured into Jackson Square holding the newspapers. The town in this photograph did not exist 3 years earlier. Neither did the weapon. The farms underneath it had paid for both. The oral histories remember both reactions in the same square: cheering and quiet. Some of the women who had watched the dials sat with the newspaper a long time. What the secret had done on the other side of the world, an Army film crew recorded a month later. This is their footage. The celebration and the ruin came out of the same 59,000 acres. Oak Ridge stayed fenced for 4 more years after the war. Then, on March 19, 1949, the gates opened. 10,000 residents watched, alongside movie stars shipped in from Hollywood for the occasion. The secret city became an ordinary city with an extraordinary line on its birth certificate. The 7 farm communities under it were never rebuilt. Of Wheat, Tennessee, 1 building survives: the George Jones Memorial Baptist Church and the cemetery beside it, inside the federal reservation. Once a year, the families that were scattered in 1942 are allowed back for a homecoming. At Hanford, the high school still stands in ruins, and tourists photograph the shell of the White Bluffs Bank. The Wanapum negotiated the right to return to their fishing sites. On passes, K-25, the largest building on the face of the earth, ran for 40 years, went quiet, and was torn down completely by 2014. The little church at Wheat outlived it. Oak Ridge never stopped working. Neither did Hanford, which today is the most contaminated place in the Western Hemisphere, with a cleanup measured in billions of dollars a year. The orchards are not coming back either. Add up what the letters never explained. 3,000 Tennesseans, 1,500 Washingtonians, a tribal fishery older than the Republic, 46 schoolboys and their Latin teacher. All moved so the war could end the way it ended. The Manhattan Project cost about $2 billion wartime dollars. The Tennessee ground it stood on cost less than $3 million at $46.86 an acre. The cheapest line item bought the whole thing a place to exist. The government paid $46.86 an acre and got the atomic age. Whether that trade was worth it is a question for philosophers and historians. The families it was taken from were never asked the question at all. The eviction letters said the purpose could not be disclosed. It has been disclosed now. The farms are still gone.